prompting the United States to break out its military might. That show of force includes firing cruise missiles into Syria, dropping the mother of all bombs in Afghanistan, moving aircraft carriers to the Korean Peninsula, and the latest, a successful missile defense test. Yet, even with these apparent wins, defense experts are worried about America's military weaknesses.
Does this stuff keep you up at night?
It does keep me up, but more importantly, it keeps up Pentagon leadership at night.
What worries top brass the most? Threats across multiple fronts.
That's the challenge right now. What we're optimized to handle is sort of the Cold War environment, where you have a singular threat.
War in the 21st century no longer relies on conventional weapons and strategy.
If we're talking about electronic warfare, Russia is eating our lunch.
Mackenzie Eaglin studies defense strategy for the American Enterprise Institute. She told CBN News the military lost its edge with the long wars in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Here we are winding down from the wars of the last decade and finding that the rest of the world did not slow down. In fact, they're catching up or surpassing us.
How much are you concerned about lack of resources, outdated equipment, or not having enough equipment?
Very much so. And it's exacerbated by the fact that we've been at war for 15 years, so a lot of our equipment and material has just been worn out. It's been worn out by years of war. Some of it to the point that it's not even worth bringing it home.
While the U.S. spends more than any other country on defense, the amount has dropped by 20% since 2010 due to spending caps mandated by law. Meanwhile, China and Russia have only increased their military spending.
We also have to be a little bit nervous when their budget is growing 10 to 20 billion every year, and ours is coming down 20 to 30 billion every year.
President Trump wants to change that with a multi-billion-dollar increase for the Pentagon, though many say it's not enough.
It's $4 billion not going to fix the problem of the military that's already been shrunk to pre-World War II levels. But it's a good start.
A lot of the root of our degradation of capabilities comes from budget uncertainty. So making sure that we can put a budget deal together that gives the military the ability to future plan in the long term will also really support long-term capabilities.
Experts and defense hawks both agree the cuts have hurt the military in more areas than troop levels and hardware. Eaglin points to China, which has taken the lead in next-generation space and missile technology. It includes the development of hypersonic missiles that travel more than a mile per second. Army commanders call them a game changer and acknowledge it would be nearly impossible to defend against them. Another loss in leadership? Research and development. In the past, military ideas drove commercial revolution within the American economy, giving the public the internet, GPS, mobile phones, and more.
Everything from plastic bags to pantyhose are from the U.S. military or derivative from research and development. The federal government is no longer the driver in research and development in our U.S. economy. It is now led by the commercial sector. The problem with that is, if the Defense Department wants access to it, everybody has access to it.
That means the military must now line up with everyone else to learn from the business world, using products like tablets for airstrikes and Xbox controllers for drones. All of this paints a disaster scenario, as was recently illustrated by a former Pentagon planner. In a series of 16 different war games designed to see whether the U.S. and NATO could defend the Baltic states against Russia, the U.S. lost every one.
So what does all of this mean for the U.S. military? Analysts say the loss of technological advantage will lead to failed missions, higher casualties, and longer wars. It's a gap the U.S. must fill now before it's too late.
NATO is increasing its military presence in the Baltic states. They're improving the infrastructure of their seaports, aerodromes, and other military facilities. This is a clear demonstration of the obvious unwillingness of Western partners to abandon their anti-Russian course.
The Pentagon put out photos today of what it calls an unsafe intercept of a U.S. spy plane over the Baltic Sea this week. A Russian fighter jet came within 5 feet of the American plane's wingtip, then flew under the spy plane and came up on the other side. The Russians insist the U.S. is to blame for making a provocative move.
The most recent terror incident happened Wednesday in Flint, Michigan. A 50-year-old Tunisian man from Canada, Amour Fatoui, attacked a police officer at Bishop Airport. He used a 12-inch survival knife like this one to stab Officer Jeff Neville.
Lieutenant Neville fought him right to the end, right until I was able to handcuff this person.
Fatui shouted Allahu Akbar, God is greatest, before attacking the airport policeman.
And he made a statement, something to the effect of, you have killed people in Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan, and we are all going to die.
Neville was taken to a Flint hospital where he was listed in stable condition. Fatui was charged with committing an act of violence at an international airport. Terrorism charges are likely. That attack here in the U.S. came after more lone wolf strikes in France and Belgium earlier this week, in Europe and even here in the United States. Officials are warning about the growing possibilities of more terrorism. And one criminology expert in Paris says people are becoming numb to all the attacks. Professor Alain Bauer compares the frequent attacks living in London and facing constant danger during the Nazi Blitz in World War II. That's when German planes repeatedly bombed innocent civilians. He said just as back then, the question is not if there will be more attacks, but when and how to endure them, with the idea that at the end the West will win. And he said that now smaller lone wolf attacks are becoming the norm. Bauer said, quote, "We've gone from hyper-terrorism to low-intensity terrorism of proximity, with few victims but with a strong media amplification." As Europeans brace themselves for more possible terrorist attacks during the busy summer tourist season, ISIS is suffering military defeats in Syria and Iraq. Iraqi troops closed in, ISIS acknowledged defeat in Mosul, blowing up the Grand al-Nuri Mosque. It's the same mosque where ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi declared the Islamic State Caliphate 3 years ago.
The DPRK has accused the United States of deploying a warship and planes to spy and conduct military drills near the Korean Peninsula. Pyongyang said the USS Mustin, a guided missile destroyer, was sent into its maritime economic zone on Tuesday, and 2 strategic bombers concluded mock exercises near its airspace. Pyongyang's Workers' Party of Korea newspaper slammed the action, saying it would bring greater disaster to the peninsula.
The death toll from clashes in the Central African Republic continues to climb, with the latest figure claiming more than 100 people have lost their lives in the bloodshed. The deadly violence erupted Wednesday in the central town of Bria between members of Christian militias and Islamist fighters. The bloodshed comes just a day after the government and rebel groups agreed to an immediate ceasefire. The Islamist rebel group Popular Front of the Rebirth of the Central African Republic signed Monday's peace accord, but its spokesman defended their continued fighting, saying they cannot allow an attack to happen without reacting. He was referring to the killing of group leader Hamad Issa in Bria Saturday.
In Fairfield, Alabama, the siren sounded as the tornado, which was captured on a cell phone, touched down just miles from downtown Birmingham. The twister ripped apart several buildings. Powerful winds tossed this truck right through a chain link fence. Emergency crews report several people were injured, but no one was killed. The tornado was likely spawned from the remnants of Tropical Storm Cindy. That storm system has dumped several inches of rain from Louisiana to the Florida Panhandle. In southwest Louisiana, creeks and bayous flooded many low-lying neighborhoods. Some areas on the Gulf Coast got up to 10 inches of rain, forcing drivers to abandon their cars.
Well, a desperate search for survivors is underway in southwest China following a deadly landslide. More than 120 people were buried alive when a hillside collapsed on their homes. At least 15 bodies have been recovered.
Rita, this landslide occurred in the early morning hours here in China, so you can assume that most people were actually asleep when it happened. Now, from these drone shots, you can see the massive amount of rock and mud that has completely covered parts of the mountain village in southwestern China. This is close to Tibet. The amount of rock and earth that slammed into the town is the equivalent of about 3,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools. It was likely triggered by heavy rains that have hit much of China in the past few days. Now, this landslide blocked more than a mile stretch of a nearby river and one of the major roads leading in and out of the town. The local province has sent about 2,000 rescuers and 24 dogs to search for survivors. Now, this is an area that has seen tragedy before. An 8-magnitude earthquake hit this part of Sichuan province back in 2008, killing nearly 70,000 people.
This sniper right up here is shooting at us as we're trying to move people.
As an aid worker in Mosul, Iraq, David Eubank is used to being confronted by civilian death.